Let's begin. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls of my penthouse, a sea of restless neon lights blinking through the night, mirroring the excitement pulsing in my veins. The hum of traffic below was a dull afterthought, lost beneath the soft melody of jazz playing in the background. The rich aroma of red wine curled into the air as I took a slow sip, my manicured fingers tracing the delicate stem of the glass. Across from me, Nick lounged on my velvet couch, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal the sculpted lines of his chest. His dark eyes gleamed with amusement, an easy smirk playing on his lips as he stretched, completely at home in my husband's penthouse, a home that wasn't his, but a luxury he was more than happy to indulge in. I watched him, feeling the rush of power that came with control. I was the one in charge here, the puppet master pulling the strings, enjoying the forbidden thrill of what I had built behind my husband's back. "You're enjoying this way too much," Nick murmured, his voice rich with amusement as he reached for the glass of whiskey beside him. I smirked, tilting my head. "Enjoying what? This little game of yours." His gaze was heavy-lidded, teasing. "The double life. The thrill of sneaking around while your husband is busy making millions." I leaned forward, setting my wine glass down with a soft clink. "David is too consumed with his empire to notice," I said smoothly, my voice carrying the confidence of a woman who had never been caught. "As far as he's concerned, I'm the perfect wife. I attend his corporate parties, smile when required, and play the role flawlessly." Nick chuckled, shaking his head as he leaned back into the couch, stretching like a lazy predator. "And all the while, you're here with me," he murmured, his gaze dark and knowing. A slow smile spread across my lips as I crossed my legs, deliberate, calculated. "That's right. And the best part," I ran a finger along the rim of my glass, drawing out the moment. "He's the one paying for everything." Nick whistled low, shaking his head in amusement. "Damn, you really have no guilt, do you?" I arched a brow. "Should I?" Silence stretched between us for a beat before Nick burst into laughter, his rich chuckle filling the space. "You're something else, Amelia." I merely smiled, lifting my wine glass in a mock toast. I was more than something else. I was untouchable, or so I thought. The night wrapped around us like a velvet cloak, thick with the kind of silence that carried no guilt, only indulgence. I shifted slightly on the couch, the smoothness of the silk robe I wore brushing against my skin as I watched Nick sip his whiskey. He was entirely at ease, stretching his legs over the coffee table like he belonged here. And in a way, he did. This was our space, the secret world we had carved out of deception, stitched together with stolen moments and whispered promises. Nick tilted his head, his gaze flicking over me with slow appreciation. "You ever get nervous?" he asked, a lazy smirk playing at his lips. "Nervous?" I arched a brow, swirling the wine in my glass. "You know," he shrugged. "About David finding out." The mere suggestion of it should have sent a chill through me. But instead, I felt something else, a thrill, a spark that ignited a fire deep in my bones. I leaned forward, resting my elbow on my knee, my lips curving into a smirk. David is too wrapped up in his world to see beyond it. To him, I'm just an accessory, his perfect wife, his trophy. I sipped my wine slowly. "And trophies don't misbehave." Nick chuckled, shaking his head. "Cold," he mused, "and yet incredibly hot." A slow smile stretched across my lips. "That's what you like about me, isn't it?" He leaned in, his breath warm against my skin as he whispered, "Among other things." The moment hung between us, thick with anticipation. I should have felt guilty. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. Instead, I let his lips trail down my neck, let my fingers knot in his hair. This was what I craved. Not the stability of marriage. Not the routine of being someone's wife. I craved the fire, the excitement, the feeling of being utterly consumed. And that was something David could never give me. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft rustle of Nick moving around my penthouse. I stretched languidly, the silk sheets cool against my skin as I blinked at the morning light filtering through the curtains. "Morning, beautiful." Nick's voice drifted from the kitchen, lazy and satisfied. I smirked, slipping out of bed and wrapping myself in the silk robe draped over the chair. "You always wake up this early?" I teased, stepping into the kitchen. Nick shot me a grin as he handed me a cup of coffee. "Old habits," he said. "Used to work construction before I figured out I preferred other forms of labor." I raised a brow, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Oh, and what do you do now?" He smirked, leaning in until his lips brushed the shell of my ear. "I make women like you very, very happy." A laugh escaped me, rich and unrestrained. "And you do it so well." I felt his arms wrap around my waist, his lips trailing along my neck. "You know what would make you happy?" he murmured. I tilted my head, amused. "Enlighten me." "A week in Hawaii," he said, his voice dripping with temptation. "Just the two of us. No hiding. No secrets. Just us." The suggestion sent a shiver down my spine. Hawaii. A dream vacation. One that David's money could easily pay for. I pulled back, considering it. And what would I tell my husband? Nick shrugged. "Tell him you're going on a girls' retreat. He won't suspect a thing." I smirked, setting my coffee down. The man had a point. David was too distracted, too obsessed with his work to even question where I was half the time. Hawaii would be effortless. And besides, what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. The plan fell into place seamlessly. Too seamlessly. I booked a luxury villa on the shores of Maui, the kind with infinity pools, private chefs, and sunset views that looked like paintings. David barely glanced up from his laptop when I told him about the trip. "That's great, honey," he said, distracted. "You deserve a break." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. "Oh, David, if only you knew." By the time I boarded the first-class flight with Nick, my excitement was nearly unbearable. The moment the plane lifted off, leaving New York behind, I felt it. Freedom. Nick smirked beside me, clinking his champagne glass against mine. "To living our best lives," he murmured. I leaned in, my lips brushing against his. "To never getting caught," I whispered. I should have known better. Because somewhere across the world, in his dimly lit office, David had already begun to suspect something. Hawaii was a dream. Luxurious, indulgent, and utterly intoxicating. Nick and I spent our days basking in the sun, our nights tangled in silk sheets, lost in a fantasy built on deception. It was everything I had craved, until the cracks began to show. It started small, a message from David, oddly timed. "Hope you're enjoying your trip." I stared at my phone, my pulse quickening. Something felt off. Nick peered over my shoulder, his brow arching. "Paranoid," he teased. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Of course not. But the uneasy feeling lingered. Because for the first time, I had a feeling David knew. And if he knew, I was already doomed. When I returned home, everything was different. David greeted me the same way he always did. A kiss on the cheek, a polite smile, a brief, "How was your trip?" But his eyes, they were different. Colder. Sharper. I told myself I was imagining things. That it was nothing. I was wrong. 2 days later, I walked into our penthouse and found it empty. Not just empty. Gutted. The furniture? Gone. My closet? Cleaned out. My bank accounts? Frozen. Panic clawed at my throat as I dialed David's number. The call went straight to voicemail. And then I saw it. A single note on the marble kitchen counter. "You took everything from me. Now, I take everything from you." My blood ran cold. Because for the first time, I was the one left with nothing. My fingers trembled as I clutched the note in my hands. The words blurred as my mind struggled to process the reality before me. Everything was gone. The penthouse I had so effortlessly indulged in. The luxury, the security, the comfort. It had all vanished overnight, like a dream I'd taken for granted. I darted into the bedroom, throwing open drawers, yanking at closet doors, desperate for anything. But there was nothing left. Not even a single piece of my jewelry. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my phone. David had to be joking. This had to be some kind of punishment, a lesson he wanted to teach me before laughing it off and forgiving me. I dialed his number with frantic fingers. Voicemail. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. Nick. I needed to call Nick. He would fix this. He would tell me what to do. But when I reached for my purse, another horror settled in. My credit cards were missing. My sleek black Amex, my gold Visa, the diamond-studded platinum card David had once gifted me for our anniversary, all of them gone. I opened my banking app with shaking hands, my vision going blurry as the numbers loaded. 0. Not just one account. All of them. I let out a strangled gasp. the walls closing in around me. David had wiped me out, and for the first time in my life, I was the one left with nothing. I ran out of the penthouse like a woman possessed. The doorman gave me an odd look, but I didn't stop to acknowledge him. My mind was racing. I needed to find Nick. He was my only lifeline now. I hailed a cab with what little cash I had left in my coat pocket and gave the driver Nick's address. The entire ride was a blur, my thoughts tangled in the impossible web of my downfall. This wasn't happening. By the time I reached Nick's apartment, I felt like I was drowning. I banged on the door, calling his name. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Panic made my hands tremble. Finally, the door swung open, and my heart shattered into a million pieces. Nick stood in the doorway, his expression shifting the moment he saw me. He wasn't alone. A woman, blonde, younger than me, wearing one of his shirts, stepped beside him, her brows furrowed in confusion. "Who is this?" she asked. I staggered back, while rising in my throat. "Nick," my voice broke. "What the hell is this?" He exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Amelia." He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I didn't expect you to show up here." Rage, humiliation, devastation. "You son of—" I took a step toward him, my fists clenched, my entire body shaking. "You're with her? After everything? After all the money I spent on you?" Nick leaned against the doorframe, his face unreadable. "Amelia, the money's gone. That was the only thing keeping us together. What did you expect?" His words were a gunshot straight to my chest. He didn't love me. He never had. I had been a game to him. A walking ATM. A woman who had played with fire and gotten burned. The blonde scoffed, folding her arms. "You should leave." I turned on my heel and ran, humiliated, heartbroken, and completely alone. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to go. The penthouse was no longer mine. My credit cards were useless. Nick had tossed me aside like I was nothing. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. I spent the first night in a dingy motel, the walls stained with the scent of cheap cigarettes and lost dreams. The sheets were scratchy, the water pressure barely a trickle, a far cry from the silk and marble I had grown accustomed to. I stared at the ceiling, my mind spiraling into darkness. How had I ended up here? I had once been powerful, untouchable, a woman who had men wrapped around her finger. And now, I was nothing. Tears burned my eyes as I clenched the motel blanket, my body shaking with silent sobs. David had done this to me, and I was going to make him pay. Days turned into weeks. I exhausted every contact, every connection I had left, desperately searching for any trace of David. But it was like he had vanished into thin air. His office? Empty. His business? Sold. His personal assets? Liquidated. He had planned this, down to the very last detail. And the terrifying realization hit me like a bullet to the chest. David wasn't just taking revenge. He was erasing me. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, staring at David's new life, my hands trembling. He looked happier than I had ever seen him. The house was modest, quiet, charming. A far cry from the penthouse we once lived in, yet it radiated a warmth that our home never had. David stood in the front yard, laughing as two small children chased each other through the grass. His children, the wife, a woman with soft eyes and a radiant smile, stood in the doorway, calling them inside for dinner. And David, he looked at her the way he used to look at me when we first fell in love. I staggered back, ball rising in my throat. This wasn't possible. How had he moved on so completely, so effortlessly, while I had spent the last 5 years scraping by, living in cheap motels, selling my jewelry, borrowing money from strangers just to survive? David had rebuilt everything, and he was thriving. My breath hitched. I had talked to him. I had to understand how he could just erase me like this. David's expression darkened the moment he saw me. His laughter faded, his body tensed. He muttered something to his wife, something I couldn't hear, before walking toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. When he reached me, his voice was calm, controlled, and deadly. "Why are you here, Amelia?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I needed to see you." His lips pressed into a firm line. "You saw me. Now leave." My chest ached at how emotionless his voice was. "David, please." My voice broke. "I have nothing." His eyes held no sympathy. "That's not my problem." Tears burned in my eyes. "You took everything from me." His lips twitched, as if I had just said the funniest thing in the world. He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against my ear. "No, Amelia, you did that to yourself." His words sent a violent shiver down my spine. He didn't hate me. He felt nothing. And that was worse than any revenge he could have planned. I had spent years convincing myself that David was weak, that he was a pushover, that he was too blinded by love and work to ever notice what I was doing behind his back. But I'd been so wrong. Because this David, this man standing in front of me, was cold, calculated, ruthless. I tried to search his eyes for the man I used to know, but he was gone. This wasn't my husband. This was the man who had outplayed me so perfectly that I never even saw the game happening. And he had won. Completely. "David, please." I stepped forward, my voice trembling. "I know I made mistakes, but I loved you. I did once. Maybe I was lost. Maybe I—" "Stop." His voice was quiet, but it slammed into me like a gunshot. "You don't get to rewrite history, Amelia. You don't get to pretend that any of this was an accident." His eyes darkened. "You made your choices, and now you get to live with them." I choked back a sob. "Can't we?" "No." He cut me off. "We can't." And then, as if to drive the knife deeper, he turned back toward the house, toward his wife, toward his children, toward the life that could have been ours, but was never meant for me. David walked away, his back straight, his posture unwavering. I watched in silent horror as he reached his wife, wrapped an arm around her waist, and whispered something in her ear. She laughed, like I wasn't even there, like I had never even existed. And then, before I could say anything else, he shut the door in my face. Just like that. I was locked out of his world forever. I stood there for what felt like hours. The reality of my choices settled in, sinking into my bones like ice. I had spent years trying to destroy him, and yet, I was the only one who had been destroyed. David had rebuilt. David had moved on. David had won. And me? I had lost everything. I stumbled away from his house, my body numb. I had no money, no home, no future. I was nobody. Nick had moved on. My so-called friends had disappeared the second my credit card stopped working. I had built my world on deception, indulgence, and betrayal. And now, all I had left were memories of what could have been. I wandered the streets that night, replaying every single moment that led me here. The first time I cheated. The first time I lied. The first time I dismissed David as a fool. And now I was the fool. Because David had known all along. And he had waited. Patiently. Silently. Until it was his turn to strike. For years, I had told myself that I had been trapped in my marriage. That I had deserved better. That I had been forced to find excitement elsewhere. But standing there, on that empty sidewalk, I was finally forced to admit the truth. I had done this to myself. I hadn't been trapped. I had been greedy. And David had been my biggest mistake. Because I thought I was using him. But in the end, he had been using me all along. I never saw David again after that night. And I never tried to contact him. Because what was the point? He was done with me. Completely. And his final revenge wasn't about taking my money. It wasn't about leaving me with nothing. It was about making me live with the regret of knowing that I had lost the only man who had ever truly loved me. And that was a punishment far worse.